Hey everybody, so welcome to another video, my Hashinshin shinies. In my last video, I asked you guys what you thought of me calling you guys the Hashinshin shinies, and wow, there was like actually a large resounding people for some reason actually enjoyed it. So you guys are now the shinies, I guess. I don't know, you guys just really enjoyed it. So in this video, this is something that I haven't really done before in the past. What I'm going to be doing is we did the patch notes yesterday, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking over who won, who lost, who got nerfed, who got buffed by this patch, and to how much. For this video, I'm only going to be going into top lane. That's because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 champions that were affected enough by this patch that I would feel that adding them to this list was something that I should be doing. Because for each of these champions, I want to be going through them for like 2 to 3+ minutes each. That meant if I went through every champion, we'd be here for like another hour and a half. I don't really intend this video to be that long, but I do want to go through like in detail, you know, at the very least go over some details on these champions and what was affected. Yeah, that's basically it. So the idea here is we're going to be going through all these different champions, and don't ask me why Maokai's like this, he's just like this. So we're going to go through all these different champions, and we're going to be saying if they received a large buff, a slight buff, are exactly the same, a slight nerf, a nerf, or a large nerf. And for all of these champions, I've looked through a lot of different things. I've tried to correlate and find statistical consistencies as much as I can, which is to say that if a champion just says like their win rate go up slightly, I like try to look into their items. I try to look across different ranks. I try to find like, is this just a fluke at this rank in particular? Because, you know, we're talking day 1 win rates here, right? So I have to make sure that at the very least for my sake that I'm not, you know, just being like, oh my God, a day 1 fluke. Look guys, it's the new most broken champion, right? Like I don't want to be the guy who does that, right? So I've looked through all these different champions, and I feel pretty confident that all these champions were affected at least enough that like they deserve to be here on this list. Okay, so these aren't alphabetized. Don't ask me how I did them in this order. I probably should have alphabetized it, but oh well. Up first we have Atrox. Now Atrox has 2 changes, and I have the patch notes over here. I'm not going to go through them like in grand detail, but basically Atrox had a few changes. Let me see if I can find it right here. Basically 2 of his items got nerfed, at least for him. Sundered Sky had the attack damage go down and the health go up. This was overall a slight tiny like 1% buff to the item's cost efficiency. I know yesterday I said it was like a 10%, but I actually totally miscalculated that, unfortunately. It was actually like only a 1 to 2% increase in its cost efficiency. Unfortunately, Atrox does like damage more than he likes HP, which is pretty obvious. So overall, this Sundered Sky change did not benefit him whatsoever, and Sundered Sky ended up being considerably weaker on him. Profane Hydra also got changed. The damaged enemies that are below 50% went from 150% down to 130%. Between Profane Hydra being weaker on him and Sundered Sky also being weaker on him, this means that now his best build is Profane Hydra pretty consistently. I'm not saying Sundered Sky is unusable. I am saying that it's kind of like falling out of favor pretty consistently here. And with both of these items being weaker, it has resulted in a slight nerf for Atrox. Nothing significant, but we're talking like a 0.5 to 1% drop in win rate consistently across the board. Additionally, because Sundered Sky is now not really that good on Atrox. Like, it's good for keeping him alive, but it's not good for winning lanes. On a champion who does not scale that amazingly, just being able to stay alive doesn't really win games. Surely against some champions, if you're fighting like an assassin, or if you're fighting something like Aurelia, definitely staying alive can very much help you, but it doesn't win games. So because of that, Atrox's win rate has seen a decent decrease, and I'm going to put him down here on slight nerf. Okay, up next is Karma. What did Karma get? Well, Karma got some changes, and I'm going through this. You guys, if you already know these, you can just listen along and watch, blah, 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 right? But Karma got some changes. the AP ratio and damage on the explosion on her RQ went down. Unfortunately, because the explosion tends to not really get used that much, and a lot of people actually got better at Karma. That's something that's actually really important. People got better at Karma. Last patch, people were not really doing that amazing on Karma. People got better at her. Overall, I would actually say that Karma was the same or a slight nerf. I'm going to end up calling it a slight nerf, although this is very slight on the slight nerf. She's definitely gotten a decrease in power. The Malignance change also didn't help her at all, but overall it does seem people are playing her better. But just based on the evidence, it does look like she is seeing a slight reduction in power. Okay. Illaoi, what happened to Illaoi? Now, I was totally wrong about what happened to Illaoi, by the way. If you guys were watching my patch video yesterday, I did not actually call this one correctly. I seem to have been actually a decent chunk, I'm going to call this, I was actually like a decent chunk wrong here. So how wrong was I with Illaoi? Okay, I was pretty wrong with Illaoi. If we actually compare this, if we go to all ranks, we can see with 3,400 games reporting, Illaoi's win rate is currently 54%. It was 51% last patch. At Emerald Plus, with a 58,000 from last patch, she was 50% win rate. With only 5,000 games played, she's a considerable amount up, though, to 53.81%. I feel that this is well out of day one fluke range, and this is well into, oh my god, this character got buffed really hard. What happened? The tentacle range went from 800 to 925. The tentacle damage went down by about 5 to 7%. Sorry, it was like 4 to 5% damage reduction on the tentacle. Unfortunately, losing like 4% damage on her tentacle did not actually nerf it hard enough, apparently, to make up for the tentacle range. Illaoi's win rate has gone up considerably, and this is pretty consistent. There's no way that this is a day one fluke. Illaoi got a rather very large, considerable buff on this patch. So, expect to see some Illaoi nerfs on the way, but at either rate, Illaoi, huge buff for this character. Very more powerful right now. As for York, let's talk about York. So York was a bit more complicated. I have played him a decent chunk on this patch, and although I didn't really do that good, York's just not really viable at the high ranks to begin with. So I did feel he's definitely more powerful right now. In total, the big changes here, where his E comes out much faster. Well, I shouldn't say much faster. It comes out faster. His Q, although it heals for less on minions, it heals considerably more on champions. And particularly with some of the bruiser items that he can go, this has made him very survivable. The mana cost on his Q went down, letting him lane a bit better. Now, his ultimate damage did get nerfed. There's absolutely no way to argue it. It did get nerfed. But between his Q mana cost going down, his Q healing going way up, and his E cast time going down, this has made him significantly more consistent, and it allows him to build more of like a bruiser build, particularly items like Sundered Sky, and it allows him to duel significantly better. It allows him to win things better, and with his E being way harder to dodge, it is way easier to E run forward, and chase down some of these ranged characters. Although he might not be high rank viable, he's definitely like a decent counter pick into the high ranks. I would agree that he's definitely, at the very least, he's a decent counter pick. Yeah, you can see here. So like on this patch, he's just at the high ranks, like at Emerald, even at Emerald Plus, he's not doing that good. But when we go down to Platinum, he's already up to 51.83, and we look at all ranks, he's 52.49. When we compare this to last patch, although he's not high ranking viable, definitely not, I would say that, you know, this is no matter how you slice it, this was a very large buff to the champion. Once again, this was not a small buff, this was a considerable buff to him. His E is much harder to dodge. I know I just said this, but his E is harder to dodge. His Q heals for a good chunk. It allows him to duel better. He went from basically troll tier shit pick to now he's overpowered at the low ranks. Unfortunately, with both Illaoi and York, Riot seems to have made them very overpowered at the low ranks, while I think Alawi is overpowered enough that like it carries into the high ranks, but Yorick is now just extremely overpowered at the low ranks. Well, I shouldn't say extremely. He's overpowered at the low ranks and barely viable at the high ranks. So not much to say about that one. Now let's talk about Set. Okay. So Set didn't get directly buffed or nerfed on his own. He actually just received some changes from items. What items got changed? Well, that would be Stridebreaker. So in my patch video, I didn't talk about Stridebreaker because Riot themselves forgot to list it. They actually forgot to list Stridebreaker. So what happened to Stridebreaker? Its health went from 400 to 550. Its health went from 400 to 450. Its damage went down from 55 to 50. It gained a cleave of a Tiamat item, because Stridebreaker is now a Tiamat item. That means it gives good wave clear on minions, and its active now does 80% of your damage on cast, as well as still giving you the movement speed buff and the movement speed slow. The cooldown went from 20 seconds down to 15. So Stridebreaker is now a first item option that you can use for wave clear, in addition to giving you the damage. So it can now proc things like Conqueror or Phase Rush. And also gives you like a little bit of a burst, not like a huge burst, but like a little bit of a burst. Now, what this means is you can no longer combine Stridebreaker and Titanic Hydra, because they are now technically both Tiamat items. But for a champion like Set, this now allows Set to do different builds, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, with that Sundered Sky change, Set doesn't really need the most damage. He obviously needs damage, but Sundered Sky actually gives Set a pretty good healthy item, coming in at 450 HP now. This means with Stridebreaker giving 450, Sundered Sky giving 450, Set now is a build that can give him wave clear and healing and a little bit of ability haste and 900 HP. So Set is just doing better. How much better? Better. I'm not saying that, oh my god, Set is now top tier and viable and one of the best champions in the game, right? Like I'm not trying to say that, right? But what I'm saying is, you know, when you look at him, let's say compared to last patch this dude was 50%. Now he's up to 51%. That's at the lower ranks. At the higher ranks, he's at 49% still, but last patch he was at 48%. So Set definitely saw a slight buff from the Stridebreaker change. Stridebreaker builds make him slightly more viable, definitely. I don't think he's good yet. I wouldn't probably play him, but I definitely think that he benefited from these changes. He is slightly better now. He is not a troll pick. He's just not very good at the high ranks. He wasn't very good last patch, but now he's like still not very good. I mean, let's be blunt. He's still not very good. So yeah, Set is, he's better. It's a slight buff. He's doing better. Is he doing good? No, but he's doing better. You know, it's like, yeah. As for Garen, on this patch, he has 51% win rate. Last patch, he was 50% win rate. If we go to Diamond, you can see he's maintained a decent win rate. That's because of Phase Rush. Now, that might be a little bit of a fluke. I doubt he's really doing that good, right? At the low ranks, he's not doing that much better. Garen's buff seems to have been primarily aimed at the higher ranks. This is because, well, as you might imagine, with Stridebreaker now being able to proc Phase Rush, Garen, into a lot of matchups that he couldn't play into, can now play into them. Because he can Q, E, and Stridebreaker, which procs the Phase Rush. And now Garen can lane into all these matchups that in the past he really couldn't do anything about. He basically had to go Conqueror into every matchup because he couldn't proc Phase Rush at any speed, right? Like he couldn't proc Phase Rush. And so the problem was, any matchup where he needed movement speed either to get in or out of the fight, he just couldn't deal with that, right? And so he just lost a lot of matchups that used to be at least decent matchups he couldn't do anymore. So obviously at the lower ranks, it doesn't really affect him that much because at the lower ranks everyone just goes like Conqueror anyway. They just go Conqueror all-in mash build. But at the higher ranks where people can try to like go Conqueror or Phase Rush depending on the matchup, this has taken Garen from, in my opinion, being, he was like okay, but I would say I would say this is actually a buff, and although it hasn't affected his win rate that much, I would say the primary benefit here is Garen now has the ability. Some of these matchups, which were definitely hardcore losing matchups, are no longer definitely hardcore losing matchups. In fact, he can win some of them because he can proc phase rush again, which, although it doesn't really affect him that much in most of his matchups, it gives him a good item. Trinity Garen is still doing pretty good. I don't think anyone thought that Trinity Force was going to be totally replaced, right? Trinity Garen is still doing pretty good, but Stridebreaker Garen continues. You can see here the win rate difference, right? The higher rank you go, Stridebreaker tends to pull ahead a little bit because not because it's just overall the better item, but because in the matchups where he has to go Stridebreaker and he has to get phase rush, it's now a good option. That's basically what I'm saying. I'm saying that although on paper this isn't that huge of a win rate increase, the thing is that a lot of these losing matchups are now better, and that's just what's happening with Garen. He can now lane more consistently into more matchups. Okay, Darius, slight buff. Darius actually doesn't really seem to have gotten affected by the Stridebreaker change that much. He was already doing really good, and now he's doing, well, really good. The primary thing here is if we look on this patch, right, if we look at 14.3, Stridebreaker is doing better on him. It's obviously got a good win rate, but it's got a very low pick rate. The main thing here is the people who are still picking Stridebreaker, despite Trinity being better in most situations, the people that are still picking Stridebreaker, they're obviously going to do better because the item is better. And much like Garen, in those matchups where he just has to go Stridebreaker because he just needs it to be able to stay into range, right? Stridebreaker is now a better option. I think in like 90% of situations, Trinity is just better on Darius, and there's not really much you can do about that. I don't really think that like Stridebreaker is the better option in basically any situation. I don't think Stridebreaker is better on Darius, right? But it's just the people who are still building it and the people who like, I'm sure there are some matchups where Stridebreaker is good, either to get in combat or maybe to try to kite out of combat, or to maybe try to kite around people. Like maybe if you're fighting Mord, maybe I don't really know. I can't really think of any situation where it's really going to outperform Trinity. But hey, the people that are hard forcing it, it's going to be better for them. The second thing is Sundered Sky. I don't think it's a good item on Darius, but it seems to be doing a little bit better because, you know, once again, Darius doesn't really need Sundered Sky, or sorry, he doesn't really need damage. He really needs HP, and Sundered Sky going up in HP and down in damage has very much benefited him. I forgot to mention that's actually benefited a lot of these champions as well. I don't think, Garen's not really going it, but Sundered Sky has definitely helped Yorick. It's definitely helped Illaoi. These two champions don't really need that much damage. Obviously, Yorick needs damage more than Illaoi, but Sundered Sky coming in at 450 HP and giving him like a decent mid-game bonk to get HP back, you know, it has very much benefited him. Illaoi as well, she doesn't need that much damage, but oh boy, does she like more healing, right? So you might notice that all these champions who are going up are basically all juggernauts, right? And it's because Yorick and Illaoi got directly buffed, and Garen, Set, and Darius have been indirectly buffed. Sundered Sky fits way more comfortably into Juggernaut builds, and Stridebreaker helps them out considerably. So that's why it seems Juggernauts are doing a lot better on this patch. As for Trundle, still good. Obviously, Trundle is still good. He did receive nerfs. His base health went down by a little bit, and his Q damage went down by a little bit. Overall, not really that big a deal. If we look at current patch and we look at the low ranks, we can see he's still doing quite good. Obviously, not as good as he was doing last patch, though, by any stretch of the imagination. But I would say that Trundle is still doing pretty good. At the higher ranks, we see it has affected him a good chunk as well. Trundle doesn't seem to have been able to use any of these new items or any buffs or anything like that. He's just gotten directly weaker, right? So realistically, there's nothing much to say. Trundle's weaker. He can't use Stridebreaker. He can't really use Sundered Sky. He got his early game nerfed as a champion that tends to want to be able to win the early game, because if you're split pushing, you want to win the early game, then you want to rotate that into a split push, and then you want to start winning the game. Now, I'm not saying that Trundle is a weak champion. I don't think any of these champions that are like nerfed, I don't think any of them are weak champions, right? I just think that overall, we can agree that they are nerfed compared to where they used to be, right? And Trundle definitely has lost 1 to 1.5% win rate across the board, and with no compensation anywhere, whereas Atrox can swap off Sundered Sky into Profane Hydra, and whereas Karma was just a really good pick who people were underutilizing, there's really nothing that benefits Trundle here. He just got nerfed really, I'm not going to say he got nerfed really hard, but he got a nerf. He can't really do anything to like mitigate the effects of the nerf, so he's just weaker now. He's just weaker. There's nothing you can do. As for Teemo, Teemo I'm going to call buffed. This one's kind of surprising me. Okay, so Teemo got a change, and I'm not really sure the exact... I hate talking about this because I don't really know exactly what it did, because I don't really have like Riot's coding in front of me. I don't really know exactly what it is. They say Teemo Q blind should more immediately apply to targets hit by the Q, preventing Teemo from taking damage from an auto attack after the blind has been applied. Blind duration should now also be consistent with the debuff duration above the target's health bar. Okay, so I imagine what it's done is that if like a projectile is in the air, it misses if it gets blinded, or more consistently, like if an auto attack is in mid animation and you get blinded, it should miss. Although this didn't really seem like that much on paper, I did look into it because I was like, well, this is probably doing something, right? On paper, this doesn't seem to have done that much. Or I should say, in theory, this doesn't seem to have done that much. But the reality of the situation is he's seen a pretty consistent 1% win rate increase across the board. This is consistent. This seems to be okay with everything. In other words, you know, I'm gonna put it in slight buff. I think it's probably better to put it in slight buff. But at either rate, what I'm saying here is Teemo definitely did get buffed by this change. This does seem to be a consistent win rate increase. I don't think this is a fluke. I don't think this will go down over time. I don't really know what to say. It definitely does seem like a slight buff. It just makes him more consistent, which makes him more reliable. That's about it. Maokai. Okay, so what happened with Maokai? We need to look at Maokai. As for item changes, no item changes seem to have affected. Oh, you know who I forgot to include was Wukong. Ooh, hold on. I totally forgot to include Wukong. Okay, there we go. Man, how did I forget about that dude? Well, we all know how I forgot about Wukong. We'll get to him later. Okay, so let's go over Maokai's changes to refresh your guys' memories. His base mana regen went down. His Q cooldown went down at the early ranks, same at rank 5. Mana cost went down. His sapling toss went from 14 flat to 14 to 12. The mana cost on sapling at the early ranks went up. The mana cost at the later ranks went down. The cooldown on his ultimate at the early ranks went up. The cooldown at the later ranks went down. Everybody got that? His passive got nerfed pretty consistently by just a smidgen throughout all levels. Not by any like huge amount, it just got nerfed by a small smidgen basically across the board. So what happened with Maokai? What happened with his top lane? Well, Maokai is a bit of a pickler here because his win rate is like, I should say his pick rate is so low that it's hard like to get a good read on him. With only 5,000 games reporting, even at the low ranks, there's only 5,000 games. It's hard to get like a read on if he got buffed or if he got nerfed. I can't really say for sure. His win rate does seem to have gone up a little bit. And when I looked at the higher ranks, his win rate went up by a little bit with 2,000 games reporting at the higher ranks. This does mean, I don't really know what this means. It does mean there's a consistent increase to his win rate, but this is like day one jitters. So like this number could like bounce up and down with only 5,000 games, even at the low ranks. Like his pick rate is just so low. I'm going to say this overall does feel like a slight buff to the champion. So I'm going to put him at slight buff. I don't really think he did better than slight buff, right? And this is like, slight buff, right? Because like I don't feel more confident. Like of all these of all these 4 champions, I think he got the slightest of the slight buff, right? Like Set is obviously doing better, Darius is doing better, Teemo is doing better. Like all 3 of these are doing, in my opinion, consistently better, right? Maokai, I'm like, yeah, he's probably doing better, right? But I can't say for sure. So on to Wukong. Now this one might surprise you. What happened to Wukong? Big buffs, right? So his Q range went from 75 to 175 to 135 to 175. So it got 60 more range at rank 1. In addition to that, the bonus AD on his Q went from 45% bonus AD to 55% bonus AD. What's more, the cooldown on his E went from 10 to 8 to 10 to 7. So he got some pretty considerable buffs for Wukong across the board. How did this end up playing out for the champion? He's exactly the same. Now, I have thought about this, and I totally forgot about him. I was considering not even listing him, but he was buffed, so let's go over it. What happened with our good pal, Kongi Kong? Well, here's the problem. Not only is his pick rate so abnormally small that it's hard to even get a good read on the data, but we are seeing a consistent either decrease or basically the same win rate across the board. Unlike Maokai, who we can draw like a parallel that like across the board at all ranks, like even with smaller games reporting, we can see that his win rate went up. With Wukong, we see nothing of the same. So I thought to myself, what's going on here, right? Like why is, with these large buffs, why is it not really shown in his win rate pretty consistently? And it occurred to me that it's because Sundered Sky. Wukong doesn't really care about healing that much. Wukong actually needs to kill people. In a long fight, Wukong is not going to win. Wukong, although he has semi-consistent damage, in long fights against champions like Mord, Darius, Atrox even, Jax, right? Like in longer fights, Wukong just isn't gonna win. He's gonna win if he kills you in EQ, RQ, RQ, right? In that situation, he can win, but he can't win these longer fights. So the problem is, all the champions around him got to go Sundered Sky and get these longer fights and enjoy longer fights, which he doesn't excel at. Wukong, on the other hand, got to be tankier as Wukong, which doesn't really do him any good. So the problem is, Wukong doesn't really seem to have benefited. I would put this under slight buff, but this is pretty consistent. No one really wants to play Wukong, and his win rate hasn't really shifted anywhere. Again, if I compare this to Maokai, Maokai definitely seems to have a consistent win rate increase. Wukong just doesn't. Like, I'm sorry to say, but Wukong just doesn't seem to have changed much at all. In fact, people are still effectively refusing to play the champion. The communities, you can kind of see in pick rates, the community aren't dumb. I can say that. You guys aren't dumb. Across the board, I would say the community as a hive mind, when you combine all your guys' intelligence and everyone's single brain cell combines, and all 100,000 of you combine your single brain cell and you form a macro organism, when that happens, the player base is pretty good at deciding who's good and who's bad. I'm not saying all the time people are good at it, but I would say it's pretty consistent that if a champion is doing better, that their pick rate will go up. That's pretty consistent. Not 100% of the time, obviously, but I would wager like 60 to 70 to 80% of the time. If a champion is doing better, then their win rate will go up. Or sorry, their win rate. If a champion's doing better, their pick rate will go up. And if a champion's pick rate goes up, often that can equal out their win rate. Because if all of a sudden a champion's pick rate doubles, then their win rate might stay the same for a patch as people slowly learn the champion. We saw that with Karma. Despite getting nerfed on this patch, Karma's win rate went up because all the people who were first timing Karma and trying her out, they were suddenly doing better with the champion, right? Because now they know how to play her and now they're doing good. So despite her getting nerfed, people are doing better. Wukong, on the other hand, the community by and large seems to have said, I don't think these buffs are going to do anything, and I'm not even going to try the champion. And by and large, his pick rate stayed basically the same, and his win rate barely seems to have gone up. His win rate does definitely seem to have gone up by like a tiny bit, but like overall, I'm not really seeing anything noticeable from this champion. So I feel fairly confident here in listing Wukong it. He's basically doing the same. And I think that about wraps it up. So who's doing better for top lane? Who's doing worse for top lane? Here we go. It doesn't seem many champions are doing worse. It seems Riot focused primarily on buffing people. That's about it. So maybe next time we'll see some champions getting giga nerfed. Maybe next time we'll see some champions doing worse. But overall, I think this is a pretty consistent list. So let me know down in the comments. What do you think, everybody? What do you think? As always, I end these videos with saying, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon, which is something I need to remember to say, because you guys need to remember to subscribe to my Patreon if you like these daily videos. This is also a new video format I'm trying out, so if you like it, tell me. If you don't like it, also tell me. You know, feedback is always good. You know, even if it's dumb feedback, once again, it's like, you know, the single brain cell thing, right? If enough people are giving me the same feedback, and even if I think it's dumb feedback, if enough people are giving me the same feedback that I think is dumb, eventually I'm gonna have to be like, okay, but why does everyone keep coming to this conclusion, right? So it does actually help me. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Give me your thoughts on all this. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.